Hello friends, welcome to iQUANTA. Here is the video solution for CAT level RC set 9. So the Facebook members must have already gone through the passage. They can directly jump to the solution part. Those of you who are seeing this passage for the first time on YouTube, you can simply pause the screen here and read the passage. And then you have to pause the screen here again and complete the passage. Now that you have gone through the passage, we can talk about it. So the passage is actually a comparison between two kinds of attitude. One is the dogmatic attitude that we can have towards things, and the other is a critical attitude that we can have towards things. So the passage is about the distinction about these two different attitudes and also about their effect or the other aspects on the evolution of human being and their way of thinking. So what is a dogmatic attitude? It is a rigid attitude towards things. You are kind of fixated towards a certain idea and you are not ready for changes. You are firm with your beliefs, in your beliefs. So you know what you know, and what you know is the only truth. And you are not ready to analyze it, and you are not ready to accept any other truth because your belief is already the best belief. This is a dogmatic attitude towards things. So if I believe that the earth is flat, the earth is flat, no argument. And the critical attitude is like ready to accept changes, analyzing aspects of the ideas, and ready to argue with different approaches and discuss different and new ideas. So this is kind of critical attitude towards things. These things have been explained in the passage. So let's read the passage from the beginning. It says that our propensity is like inclination or tendency to look out for regularities. So human brain and mind has been designed in such a way that we are constantly looking for regular patterns and regular trends in things. And whenever we do not find any regular pattern in ideas or in objects, we look at it as a chaos and we don't feel at ease. So this is the fundamental characteristic of human existence. So out of these two ideas, one is dogmatic attitude and the other is critical attitude. Sorry for that. So the passage argues that actually this dogmatic attitude is more fundamental to humans, and we have been like that because we are always looking for regularities and we want to impose laws upon the nature, leads to the psychological phenomena of dogmatic thinking, or more generally dogmatic behavior. So because we are constantly looking for regular patterns, it is very natural that we have a dogmatic behavior. We expect regularities everywhere and attempt to find them even where there are none. Events which do not yield to these attempts, so we attempt to find regularities, but there are certain events which will not show any kind of regularities, and still we are inclined to treat as a kind of background noise. So to these events we call background noise. So the events where we don't find pattern, where we don't find regularities, we call those events background noise. We are not happy with those things actually, and we stick to our expectations even when they are inadequate, and we ought to accept defeat. So when you actually should accept defeat, you do not accept defeat because you are dogmatic and you know what you know. So you are not going to yield. This dogmatism is to some extent necessary. This is very important. So the author is not entirely against the dogmatism. Author says that this dogmatism up to some extent is actually necessary, because if you do not have a firm belief system, you will be swindling between the ideas and you will be constantly changing your opinion. If you don't believe in anything, or if you are very much flexible, you are open to any kind of new ideas, you will be always questioning your belief system or your opinions. So that is also not a good thing. Up to certain extent, we need to be dogmatic in our approach. It is demanded by a situation which can only be dealt with by forcing our conjecture upon the world. Moreover, this dogmatism allows us to approach a good theory in stages by way of approximations. If we accept defeat too easily, we may prevent ourselves from finding that we were actually very nearly right. So, you should not always accept the defeat in terms of your opinions and ideas. So, if there is a counter argument, it is not necessary to agree with the counter argument all the time, because you are very open to the new ideas. Maybe your idea was actually the right idea, the correct idea, and that is why you should argue and you should support your own idea. You should be open to the new ideas, but there is an extent. Now, the author brings in the other aspect, which is the critical attitude. So, this was about the dogmatic attitude, that is how this dogmatic attitude functions. And now it is clear that this dogmatic attitude, which makes us stick to our first impressions, is indicative of a strong belief. So, if you are dogmatic, that means you have a strong belief system, you believe what you believe and you are not ready to change. While a critical attitude, which is ready to modify its tenets is like principles. In critical attitude, you are ready to modify your fundamental principles, and this attitude admits doubt and demands test and is indicative of a weaker belief. So, in dogmatic belief system, you have a very strong belief system. In critical attitude, you have a weaker belief system. Now, according to Hume's theory and to the popular theory, the strength of a belief should be a product of repetition. Thus, it should always grow with experience and always be greater in less primitive persons. But, so wherever you find a but, that part is very important, because now you are going to have a contradiction in the ideas. So, Hume's theory believes that with the greater experience, you will be more dogmatic, because you have got a repetition of ideas with the experience and with the passage of time. But the author notices that dogmatic thinking, an uncontrolled wish to impose regularities, a manifest pleasure in rites and in repetition as such, is characteristic of primitives and children actually. So, it is contrary to the Hume's theory, and in increasing experience and maturity sometimes create an attitude of caution and criticism rather than of dogmatism. So, author does not agree with Hume's theory. According to Hume's, as you grow, as you get older, you become more dogmatic. That is Hume's theory. But the author says that as you grow and as you spend more time on earth, you become open to more ideas, new ideas with your experience. So, there is a contradiction. My logical criticism of Hume's psychological theory and the consideration connected with it may seem a little removed from the field of the philosophy of science, but the distinction between dogmatic and critical thinking, or the dogmatic and the critical attitude, brings us right back to our central problem. For the dogmatic attitude is clearly related to the tendency to verify our laws, schemata, by seeking to apply them and to conform them, even to the point of neglecting refutations, whereas the critical attitude is one of the readiness to change them, to test them, to refute them, to falsify them if possible. So, that is again here the author has highlighted the difference between the dogmatic attitude and critical attitude, that in the dogmatic attitude you will stick to your ideas, while in the critical attitude you will be open to changes, you will be open to refute the existing ideas, you are even open to falsify the existing ideas if possible, if logically the new opinion follows. This suggests that we may identify the critical attitude with the scientific attitude. So, here again a different kind of analogy. So, here the author says that this critical attitude is actually very close to the scientific attitude, because in science you do the same kind of things. In science you have same kind of approach as in the critical approach, and dogmatic attitude with the one which we have described as pseudoscientific approach. So, critical approach is closer to scientific approach and dogmatic approach is closer to pseudoscientific approach. It further suggests that genetically speaking, the pseudoscientific attitude is more primitive. So, here again he finds a contradiction to Hume's theory. that if pseudoscientific, which is dogmatic, is more primitive, then again Hume's theory does not hold. It is another reason. That means this dogmatic approach is more fundamental to human nature than critical attitude. And prior to the scientific attitude, so this is the same thing, that is a pre-scientific attitude. So before scientific attitude, we had this dogmatic attitude, and on the ground of this dogmatic, I am not reading the passage here. So on this ground of dogmatic attitude, we build the future. We build the future for this critical attitude. Had there been no dogmatic ideas, had there been no belief which are already existing, we won't need to modify any ideas. So because there were fixed ideas, we came up with the critical attitudes to modify those ideas. That is the author's opinion. This is what the author is trying to say, and you will read this further. And this primitivity or priority also has the logical aspect, for the critical attitude is not so much opposed to the dogmatic attitude as superimposed upon it. Again, here this sentence is again very important. Here the author is actually trying to say that critical attitude is not opposed to the dogmatic attitude. They are not opposites. It's simply that critical attitude and dogmatic attitude have kind of certain superimposition. So there is a kind of superimposition between these two approaches. They are not opposed to each other. So on the basis of the first approach, you get this second approach. Had there been no first approach, there would be no second approach. This is the relationship between these two approaches. Criticism must be directed against existing and influential beliefs in need of critical revision. In other words, dogmatic beliefs. A critical attitude needs for its raw material, as it were, theories or beliefs which are held more or less dogmatically. So that is what I was saying, that even to have this critical attitude, you need certain kind of raw material, and what that raw material is? That raw material is this dogmatic attitude or the beliefs which are held dogmatically. So these beliefs work as a raw material to this critical attitude. So because there are certain kinds of belief in society or elsewhere, you work on those beliefs, you come up with new and evolutionary ideas, and you call it a critical attitude. Had there been no belief, there would be no critical attitude. Thus, science must begin with myths. So myths represent dogmatic ideas, and criticism of myths represents the critical attitude. That means the scientific idea or the scientific way of thinking. So it must begin with this and with the criticism of this, neither with the collection of observations nor with the invention of experiments, but with the critical discussion of myths and of magical techniques and practices. The scientific tradition is distinguished from the pre-scientific tradition in having two layers. Like the latter, it passes on its theories, but it also passes on a critical attitude towards them. The theories are passed on not as dogmas, but rather with the changes to discuss them and improve upon them. The critical attitude, the tradition of free discussion of theories with the aim of discovering their weak spots so that they may be improved upon, is the attitude of reasonableness, of rationality. From the point of view here developed, all laws, all theories remain essentially tentative or conjectural or hypothetical, even when we feel unable to doubt them any longer. Before a theory has been refuted, we can never know in what way it may have to be modified. So first you refute a theory, and only then you know how you want to modify that theory. So this was the passage, a comparison between two different kinds of attitudes and how they apply to the fundamental human natures, and how the dogmatism has been more fundamental to human nature than critical attitude. Dogmatism, or the beliefs that are part of this dogmatism, form the raw material, or the raw material for the critical attitude. That is the passage. Now let's jump to the questions. Question number 1 says that in the context of science, according to the passage, the interaction of dogmatic beliefs and critical attitude can be best described as. So here you are going to define the interaction between dogmatic beliefs and critical attitude. So what kind of relationship do they share? So here are the examples. So all these examples represent a kind of analogy. So you already understand the nature of relationship between critical attitude and dogmatic belief. You have read this in the passage. Now 5 different kinds of analogies have been given, which is analogous to the relationship which is shared between these two ideas. So A says it's a duel between two warriors in which one has to die. That means one will defeat the other ultimately. So is it the relationship shared by these two ideas? No. One forms the foundation for the other. One works as a raw material for the other. And here you are making them opposite and one will kill the other. So that is not the relationship that is shared between these two ideas. And 2 says that the effect of a chisel on a marble stone which while making a sculpture, that you hit a marble stone with a chisel and you keep hitting it until you finally come up with a new kind of shape, with a new sculpture. So that was the raw material, the marble was the raw material on which you worked, and then you came up with something very beautiful and with modified idea, a very beautiful sculpture. So this exactly represents the nature of relationship that is shared by these two ideas, dogmatic beliefs and critical attitude. This is exactly how they work. So you work on these dogmatic ideas, you work on those, you keep hitting those dogmatic beliefs with a chisel, and finally you bring out a new sculpture, a beautiful shape, a revolutionary and ultimate piece of artifact. So yes, it is the answer. And 3 says that the feed share, that is natural gas in fertilizer industry being transformed into fertilizers. So this is only there to confuse, no feed share is getting transformed. So not one is not being transformed into fertilizers. And 4 says that a predator killing its prey, so it is similar as 1. So 1 and 4 are kind of same and both are not the nature of relationship shared between these two ideas. And 5 says that the effect of fertilizers on sapling, again this is not as good as this one. So out of 2 and 5, 2 is a better analogy, and this represents the relationship between these two ideas in a much better way as compared to 5.1. So because on sapling the effect of fertilizer sometimes could be positive, sometimes could be negative, and it's kind of vague, but this defines it exactly and accurately, because here one serves as a raw material for the other idea. So 2 is the answer. Question number 2, it says according to the passage, the role of a dogmatic attitude or dogmatic behavior in the development of science is. So what is the role of dogmatic attitude in the development of science? So we just discussed this only, that it works as a raw material. So what does it do? So let's read the option choices. A says that you'll focus on these first words. So it is critical, it is positive. We can consider this. So the role of dogmatic attitude in the development of science is critical or is positive. So we can consider these two words. But is it negative? Is the role of dogmatic attitude in the development of science is negative? No, it's not negative, it is positive if nothing else. So it can be ruled out immediately. Neutral also can be ruled out negative immediately because it has an impact in the development of science, and inferior to the critical attitude it can also be. So these 3 choices are very easy to eliminate. Now we only need to read 1 and 2. So the role of dogmatic attitude has been critical and important, as without it the initial hypothesis or conjectures can never be made. And B says that the role of dogmatic attitude towards the development of science is positive, as conjecture arising out of our dogmatic attitude becomes science. So this part that conjecture arising out of our dogmatic attitude, this becomes science, is not true, and we should not go with this, but this choice is correct. It says that the rule is critical and important, as without this initial hypothesis or conjectures can never be made. So, because of this dogmatic attitude, you make the initial hypothesis or the conjectures, the beliefs. So, 1 is correct, 3 are easy to eliminate, and 2 is not factually correct. Question number 3. Which of the following statements best supports the argument in the passage that a critical attitude leads to a weaker belief than a dogmatic attitude does? So, we read the passage in detail, and we already know that dogmatic attitude represents a stronger belief system, and a critical attitude represents a weaker belief system. So, this is a truth, general truth that we know after reading the passage. So, but which of the following statements supports this thing? So, A says that a critical attitude implies endless questioning, and therefore it cannot lead to a strong belief. Yeah, looks to be very true, looks to be a valid choice. Let us read other choices. 2 says that a critical attitude by definition is centered on an analysis of anomalies and noise. Here, this is the problem, that critical attitude has been called noise itself in the passage. No, actually not the critical attitude, but the absence of regularities, absence of pattern has been called noise, background noise. And this says that a critical attitude by definition is centered on an analysis of anomalies, like differences and noises. So, this statement is not true. This is a very strong claim, and this critical attitude does not depend on that. It is not centered on the anomalies, rather it is centered on those dogmatic beliefs, and from them you try to refute those beliefs, you try to come up with modifications. That is the beginning of critical attitude. And a critical attitude leads to questioning everything, and in the process generates noise without any conviction. So, again very strong and not true, easy to eliminate. 2 and 3 are very easy to eliminate. 4 says a critical attitude is antithetical, that means opposed to the conviction which is required for strong beliefs. So, again looks very valid, that a critical attitude is antithetical, it is opposed to the conviction, fixed beliefs, which is required for strong beliefs. So, this conviction is required for strong beliefs, and critical attitude is antithetical to that. So, that is why it represents a weaker belief system. And 5 says that a critical attitude leads to questioning and to tentative hypothesis. Again this looks very promising. So, we are left with 3 choices, 1, 4 and 5. All these choices have the potential to be the answer, but let us see what is the problem with 1. So, you have to compare 1 with 5 and read both these option choices. So, A says, just focus on the language that has been used in these 2 options. So, A says that a critical attitude implies endless questioning, that the questions will never end, they will just go on and on and on and on, and therefore it cannot lead to strong beliefs. So, this cannot lead is again. So, this option, though it looks very promising, but it has got 2 fundamental problems, these 2 words, endless and cannot lead. So, this makes this statement very strong and harsh. So, this is like a very extreme kind of statement. The nature of this statement is very extreme and fundamental, I mean like fanatic. So, because of these 2 strong words, the wording of this option is not better than this choice, because here in 5 it is saying the same thing, but in a moderate way of saying this. So, a critical attitude leads to questioning, and here it implies endless questioning, and here it leads to questioning. So, leads is better word than implies first of all, then endless is not present here. So, this is better. So, a critical attitude leads to questioning and to tentative hypothesis. Yes, here you are moving towards science. If then this hypothesis, this tentative hypothesis will lead to science. So, critical attitude has been quoted as the fundamental reason behind the scientific attitude. In fact, this critical attitude has been called the scientific attitude. So, here you get the hint towards science. So, that is another addition that makes this choice better. So, first of all, this does not use very strong words like endless and cannot, plus even scientific beliefs can be very strong beliefs. Do you see this? That even after applying this critical attitude, you come up with some new ideas and you have a very strong belief in that new idea. It is possible. But here, even after applying this thing, you never lead to strong beliefs. So, this is very strong. So, we can eliminate this. Now, we are left with 4 and 5. Again, both are very close, because here it says that a critical attitude is antithetical to conviction, and conviction is very much required for strong beliefs. So, which one should you choose out of 4 and 5? You should go with 5 and not with 4. Why? Because in the passage you have to focus on the content of the passage. The passage has not focused on the need of conviction, rather it has discussed that how a critical attitude may lead towards to a scientific attitude, and critical attitude, in critical attitude you actually question the existing belief system. You keep questioning, and this was written I think here, if you go back to the passage, that it is clear that in dogmatic attitude which makes you stick to your first impression, and this is indicative of a strong belief, while a critical attitude which is ready to modify its tenets, which admits doubts and demands tests, is indicative of a weaker belief. So, here by admitting the doubts, by modifying the fundamental principles, and by demanding these kind of tests, you are actually ready to question the existing belief system. So, there is no hint of conviction here, and this thing has been highlighted in the passage, the questioning thing, and that is why out of 4 and 5 you should go with 5, because this was the conviction thing has not been highlighted in the passage. Though it could be true, it looks very promising, but this is better because the passage talks about this. So, you have to remain in the ambit of passage. Now, final question, fourth one, it says that according to the passage, which of the following statements best describes the difference between science and pseudoscience? So, here science represents the critical attitude, and pseudoscience represents the dogmatic attitude, what the passage was about. So, the passage was about these two different kind of attitudes. Science represents the critical one and this represents the dogmatic one, and what describes the difference between these two attitudes. One says that scientific theories or hypotheses are tentatively true, whereas pseudosciences are always true. Is it true that pseudosciences, this fundamental belief or dogmatic belief, is it always true? You cannot say that it is always true. So, this part is incorrect. Scientific laws and theories are permanent. No, I do not agree with this. It says that scientific laws and theories are permanent. It is not true. They are always ready to change, and they are always, all the scientific theories are only hypotheses until and unless they are broken by some future scientist. So, this is again not true that they are permanent. I do not want to read this further. 3 says that science always allows the possibility of rejecting a theory. Yes, it does. Theory or hypothesis. Yes, it does. Whereas pseudosciences seek to validate their ideas or theories. The pseudosciences represent the dogmatic attitude, and science represent the critical attitude. So, in the critical attitude, you always allowed the possibility of rejecting a theory or a hypothesis at every stage. Where in pseudosciences, which represent dogmatic attitude, you always seek to validate your ideas or theories. Yes, it is true, and it looks to be the correct distinction between these two ideas. 4 says science focuses on anomalies and exceptions so that fundamental truths can be uncovered, whereas pseudosciences focus mainly on general truths. I am not happy with the second part, that pseudosciences mainly focus on general truths. Pseudosciences focus on whatever belief they have. They do not care whether it is general truth or specific truth. 5 says science progresses by collection of observations or by experimentation. This is actually not true. In the passage it was clearly denied here. Neither with the collection of observations. So, science must begin with myths and with the criticism of myths, neither with the collection of observations nor with the invention of experiments, but with the critical discussion of myths. And here it says that science progresses by collection of observation or by experimentation, whereas pseudoscience do not worry about observations and experimentation. Maybe we can say this, because here you do not worry about observations and experiment, but this was not the highlight of the passage. Rather, the passage denies this first part, that science should not progress by collection of observation or by experimentation. So, this is not true according to the passage. We should not go with it. Obvious answer is 3. So, we are done with the passage. I hope you just like this passage and the explanation. We will see you again with the next passage. Thank you very much.